When you deal with the Social Security number, you become immune to these regulations because they don't apply to you. They only apply to U.S. corporate federal citizens. And when you give up the number, you are no longer one of those.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. This is part 2 of my interview with Brent Johnson. Now, if you missed part 1, and many people did since YouTube refuses to notify all of my 622,000 subscribers, so if you're one of those that missed part 1 of this conversation, I'll just link part 1 down below. Alright friends, thanks for tuning in. Just a quick word from this interview sponsor. Did you know that after age 20, your body produces about 10% less collagen each passing decade? Well, the results of that are wrinkles, flaky skin, hair loss, dry nails. It's a disaster. That's why Ageless Multi-Collagen was made. Ageless Multi-Collagen gives you the 5 types of collagen you need from 4 premium sources in one complete protein mix. You'll enjoy powerful support for your entire body with results you will see and feel in a few short weeks. Get Ageless Multi-Collagen for 51% off plus free shipping by going to healthwithsgt.com. I'll leave the link below this interview. Look, for those of us who have studied this and researched it, it feels really dicey when you see people like Peter Schiff's father, Irwin Schiff, spend his last days in prison because he tried to fight this system. Maybe Irwin Schiff went about it the wrong way, but how do people opt out so they don't end up in prison?
I'm going to tell you the answer to that in a moment. First off, just so you know, Irwin, bless his heart, never accepted the significance of the Social Security number, and that is why he failed. Okay, the Social Security number is the joinder for the entire system, all of it. Okay, when you get a Social Security, you have to understand the number. The old Social Security cards actually used to say on them, this number is the property of the United States government. It actually used to say that on there, and that hasn't changed. It doesn't say it anymore, but I mean, the fact has not changed. The number itself is the property of the government. So it is not your number. It has been assigned to you. In other words, federal property has been attached to you. Everywhere you go, you walk around with this federal property attached to you. That's why you are subject to federal jurisdiction, because you're walking around with the government's property. So here's the thing. Assignment, okay, is a legal process. And accepting the Social Security number, okay, is part of entering into a contractual relationship with the government. And in any contractual relationship, when you enter into it, there are 4 necessary components to that entry into the contract. They are, it must be a knowing, intelligent act, intentional, and voluntary. Now, that means you have to know what you're doing. That's number 1. It has to be an intelligent act. You have to have considered and thought about it. Intentional means you have to intend the consequences of entry into the agreement. And voluntary is self-defining. It has to be voluntary. So let me ask you a question. When you first got your Social Security number, or if you got it as a minor when you turned 18, did any government official ever tell you that having the number was voluntary and by accepting it, you were waiving your rights? Yes or no?
No.
That means that the assignment itself is fraudulent. You could not have known what you were doing if indeed you were not informed that it was voluntary. Now, the thing about fraud is there's no statute of limitations on fraud. If something happens 80 years ago and you just discover the fraud today, you can go after the fraud, okay, dating back 80 years. Only when you start to discover the fraud does any kind of statute of limitations come into effect. So here is the key, okay, you have to, and it's not actually returning. The term would be rescinding. You have to rescind the number itself. And the way you do that is, it's not your number. You can't do anything with it. What you can do is take back your permission, that is your signature on the application for the number. And if your parents signed for you as a minor and you didn't do anything when you turned 18, it becomes your signature. And you take back your permission for them to assign their number to you, retroactive to the original assignment of the number. What that means is that you have never had a social security number, because anything that is based on fraud is invalid in law. It completely vitiates all contracts and all agreements. So since the number was not properly assigned to you, it was never assigned to you. You have never had a number, and if somebody asks you, you can honestly say, I've never had a number, and you say, due to my sincere religious conviction. You don't have to tell them what your religion is. Those 3 words are specific, and they invoke religious protections and religious discrimination laws that are on the books. And so by rescinding your permission for them to assign their number, it means you've never had a number. Technically, it means you're entitled to all the money you ever put into Social Security and income tax back in your pocket. Don't get excited. It's not going to happen. Okay, in the corrupt courts and everything, forget it. It's just not going to happen. When I did this, I considered that all that money that I put into Social Security and income tax was the price of my tuition for my education on this. And that way, I was able to acclimate to it. Because a lot of people will say, I'm not going to give up my number. I put all that money into it and everything. I'm not going to give up that number. And the bottom line is, if you really want to reclaim your rights that you have waived, see, that's when you waive them. When you accepted the number, part of that agreement is, in order for you to be controlled by the government, you have to waive your rights. That's why you have no constitutional protections, because you've waived your rights. And the Constitution, you don't have any constitutional rights. You never did. The Constitution is a limitation on government. It doesn't give you your rights. Your rights come from God. All the Constitution does is it prohibits the government from violating those rights. Well, since you have waived your rights, since you've put them on the shelf, the Constitution won't protect you anymore. Duh!
Let me ask you something. I was talking to somebody who's pretty smart, and this person has heard or believes that, for instance, in the case of a 1099, say you're a private contractor, you get paid directly from XYZ company, and at the end of the year they send you a 1099. So maybe you have 5, 6 of those at the end of the year, and that's your income. Those 1099s are shared with the government by the people that paid you, and then you're supposed to file your copies of the 1099. Then they tax you on that. This person believes that you can do an amended return and go back and correct those 1099s because it wasn't income. I mean, it's not taxable income, and you could get that money back by doing an amended return. Do you think that's dangerous territory?
Yeah, you're talking about a 1099X is what you're talking about. And yes, it can be done. Here's the thing. We're talking about 2 separate things. In the one case, you're talking about the tax. Okay, and by addressing the tax in that way, you are trying to use the existing statute, okay, to exempt you. Exemption, by the way, is a term that means that the exemption is granted by the giver of the privilege. In this case, the giver of the privilege is the federal government. So you are requesting an exemption, and you're doing it by, redefining what your taxable income is. Okay, when you deal with the Social Security number, you become immune to these regulations because they don't apply to you. They only apply to U.S. corporate federal citizens. And when you give up the number, you are no longer one of those. And just like, the IRS regulations don't apply to a citizen of Japan living in Tokyo. They just don't apply. I mean, they don't have universal application. Who do they apply to? They apply to U.S. citizens. If you do what you just suggested, you retain your Social Security number because you can't file these forms without it. you retain your social security number, you are still a US citizen. You still have no rights. You may or may not be successful. Let me tell you why. Okay, now XYZ Corporation that you mentioned, okay, files a 1099-S with the IRS. And in it, let's say that, I don't know, let's say I'm paying you $1,000 a week, okay? So they file a 1099-S for, you know, whatever, maybe quarterly or something like that. And they say, okay, we have paid Sean $12,000 in taxable earnings, okay? They file that, and the IRS, next to Sean's name, has column A and column B. I'm simplifying it. Okay, they get that 1099-S and they put in column B $12,000. And now they wait for Sean to file a 1099 that says I earned $12,000. And then they put $12,000 in column A. Column A matches column B. They check it off. They go to the next taxpayer. Now, if Sean doesn't file a return, okay, they come out and they say, well, we got $12,000 in column B, but nothing in column A. Then they contact Sean. They say, according to our records, you owe us yada, 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 yada. Now, if you, okay, file a revised return and you say that the actual amount is zero, then it's going to come out in column A. You file a return, zero. Okay, so zero does not match $12,000. They're still going to come after you, and they're still going to, you know, try. Now you may have arguments that you can make, which may or may not be successful, and taking into account that the courts are corporate courts, not legitimate judicial courts. Okay, I don't think that you have a very good chance of winning, but you might if you're smart and if you're able to conduct yourself in a court venue. But I think going to court is a last resort. It's really not a great option. Here's the thing. If you don't actually file anything, ultimately, it is XYZ company that holds the liability because they are the ones who declared the $12,000 to be taxable income. They declared it. Now, you understand, when I work for you for an hour, you pay me $10. Like I said, there's no profit there. There is no income there. There is no income tax. And everyone knew that before the advent of what I told you happened after the repeal of the victory tax. Everybody knew that. Okay, today, everybody goes to their attorneys and their certified public accountants, certified by whom? To find out what they owe. They don't take it on themselves to determine that. So they are told, and they do what they are told, which we talked about earlier. Okay, but the reality is that your earnings for labor are in exchange. There is no tax there. It only becomes taxable because either you or the company have declared it to be so. And when you do, you become liable for it. When you file a 1040 form that says I earned $12,000 in taxable income, okay, and you sign your name to that, guess what? Now they can collect it because you declared it to be taxable. Well, in this case, the XYZ company is the one that declared it to be taxable. So they're the ones that are liable until and unless you, Sean, file the return for column A. That's how it works.
So in future years, if one were to, well, and by the way, most people are employed by an employer and their taxes are taken out of their check before they even get paid. But in the case of people that get 1099s and are paid directly by businesses or companies, in future years, how would you then file your taxes? Do you first rescind your Social Security number? And then, let's say you do that, what do you do with taxes? And how do you handle these 1099s in subsequent years?
In the first case, if you rescind the Social Security number, you're no longer a U.S. citizen. You are a foreign citizen. You are a California citizen, a Michigan citizen, a New York citizen. But you remember, they are countries unto themselves. And prior to the war between the states, that was known. Everybody was a citizen of their state. The 14th Amendment, okay, which itself was fraudulently I'm going to say enacted, but it wasn't really properly enacted, created a new class of citizenship, supposedly for the black people, but that's a bunch of crap. and that's where U.S. citizenship first showed up. Before that, everyone knew they were a citizen of their state. So when you rescind the number, you revert to being a citizen of your state with all of your God-given unalienable rights. So you're a foreign to federal jurisdiction. That means that if you go to work for somebody, what you do when you go to work is you give them what's called a W-8 form. A W-8 form is a certificate of foreign status. It does not require a number. It even says Social Security or taxpayer ID number optional. It even says it on the form. Okay, when your company has that document, they are not required to withhold from you or to 1099 you or anything like that. Now, out of ignorance, they may do it anyway. And if they do it anyway, they become liable because they're the ones declaring it to be taxable income. But if you're on a withholding thing, okay, a W-4 withholding thing, you can only do that if you have a Social Security number. So if you've gotten rid of the Social Security number, the proper thing to do is to give them a W-8 form. Now, the practical problem you run into is that these corporations don't know anything about it. They're doing what their attorneys and accountants tell them and nothing more. They don't know the law, so there are practical considerations. Obviously, the best scenario is if you work for yourself and you can control both sides of the coin. But that's the reality and the legal reality of the why and how of the income tax.
All right. Very complicated stuff. There's no magic bullet, but I really do appreciate this conversation. Let me ask you this.
Well, you asked about property taxes.
No, that's exactly where I was going next. Let me ask you this.
Yeah, but just before I do the property tax, one last thing on this. The issue with the Social Security number, and by the way, in my book, The American Sovereign, in the book itself is sample documentation as to how to go about rescinding the number. Okay, it tells you exactly how to go about doing it. It is not difficult at all, and there's nothing they can do to stop you from doing it because all you're doing is taking back what was yours in the first place. But here's the thing.
Well, I was just going to say, word of caution to anybody who wants to go and try to do that, then you're not getting any Social Security payments when you retire, correct?
That's correct. You are giving, this is what I was about to say. What you are doing is you are giving up your eligibility for government programs. Okay, you can still get a driver's license if you want to do that and all that stuff. You can still get a hunter's permit if you want to do something like that. That only compromises your rights with respect to that activity. But Social Security is across the board. It's a waiver of your rights completely. If you want to live free, if it's important to you, then you must give up the number. But what you do when you give up the number is you give up your eligibility for Social Security, welfare, food stamps, unemployment insurance. You want health insurance? You can get it. Go buy it from Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Not a problem. You don't need a Social Security number to do that, believe it or not. Okay, because I've done that. I know this. Okay, but you can't take these things from the government because the only government that can give you these things is the corporate government. So it's a question of your freedom. How important is your liberty and your rights given by God to you?
Yeah. All right.
Are you willing to do what you have to do to get them back? That's what it's about.
All right. Well, I knew this would be an in-depth conversation, and we've already gone close to an hour, maybe an hour or so here, but I do want to talk about property taxes. So Thomas Jefferson said, the only reason to resort to government at all is to protect our liberties. Now, our liberty includes property. Now, let's just go back to The Crisis by Thomas Paine. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. I want to talk about our homes and property taxes. A lloydial title is a real property ownership system where the real property is owned free and clear of any superior landlord. In this case, the owner will have an absolute title over his or her property. Property owned under a lloydial title is referred to as alloidial land. Are there any alloidial landowners in the United States? Because the one that comes to mind to me is the Queen. She owns more property than anybody on the planet, and guess what? It's all free and clear. Why in the world are we forced to pay property taxes that put us in a situation of never truly owning our homes or the land upon which they sit free and clear?
Okay, now first, there's two separate issues. Opting out of property tax and allodial title. Allodial title, the answer is no. Nobody has allodial title, and I'll tell you why. In order to get allodial title, what you have to do is a few steps you have to take. Step one, you have to do a complete title search back to the original land grants. That can be done, no problem. Make sure there are no clouds on the title. Okay, so you've done that, fine. Then you get a land patent on it. That can also be done. If you're in one of the original 13 colonies, you have to go through the state, otherwise you go through the federal government. You get your land patent, no problem. It is step three that is impossible. Allodial title is supreme ownership. That means there is absolutely no claim on the land whatsoever. Okay, in order to get that, you have to clear the debt that is the public debt on the land. This cannot be accomplished through what's called quiet title procedures. You have to actually find out the debt holder and pay the debt. Now, it is estimated, okay, that the debt on any given piece of property averages around 7 times the annual property tax, but nobody knows for sure because nobody can find out this information. You go to the county recorder on one end, you go to the Department of Interior on the other end, and you do your research, but I don't know, in 30 years, I don't know a single person who has been successful in this, because until and unless you can find out the debt holder, you can't pay the debt. Now, here's how it gets debt on it. Every piece of recorded property at the Registrar of Deeds or the county recorder, every piece of recorded property is collateralized for government debt. Government borrows money and they collateralize the recorded property over which they exercise jurisdiction. So that's how public debt attaches. Any property that's ever been recorded has public debt on it. You have to eliminate the public debt. That's the final step before you can claim allodium or allodial title on it. That's why nobody, to my knowledge, has been successful in doing that. But
What a scam.
opting out of, yes, it is, but opting out of property taxes can be done. I had 5 acres in Central Texas, nice acreage, for many, many years. I bought it in a common law transaction, a private transaction, and I sold it in a private transaction, and I never paid a penny in property tax, and I was never invoiced. I never got a property tax statement. Here's why. The tax itself is not a tax on property. If it was, it would be unconstitutional. The Constitution mentions not once but twice, there shall be no direct taxations without apportionment. Now, apportionment, okay, works like this. The federal government wants $500 million for the war effort. California, let's say, has 10% of the population. So California gets a bill for $50 million. Let's say California has 25 million people in it. Everybody pays $2. That's apportionment. It does not care whether you're employed, unemployed, old, young, male, female, black, white, executive or worker, labor, doesn't matter. Everyone pays $2. That's apportionment. That's why the victory tax was not apportioned. It was a 5% tax. So it says that twice in the Constitution. And a direct tax is a tax on life, liberty, or property. If the tax was a tax on your property, it would be unconstitutional. It would have been ruled unconstitutional many, many years ago. It is not. So what is the tax? This is going to get you upset. Okay. The tax is a tax on voluntarily using government services that you were not required to use. What government services? The county recorder, the registrar of deeds. The 5 acres I told you about? See, I knew this, okay? So I never recorded the property. Because I never recorded it, I never got a tax statement. I even, as an exercise, sent a letter to the recorder in that county. And what I said in the letter was, I'm thinking of buying property in the county. I want to know, is there any law requiring me to record the property with you? And they didn't respond. So I sent them a second letter, and they still didn't respond. So I sent them a third letter, and I put, you know, some additional oomph into the third letter. Come on, I've been sending you these letters and all that. And I got back the third letter itself. They sent it back, and the recorder had handwritten on the letter, "No, there is no law requiring you to record the property," and signed it. Now, I knew that, of course, okay, but that's the point. Since there is no requirement when you record the property, and most people buy their property through lawyers who always record it.
A real estate.
Okay.
Like you're
yes.
buy a house, you sign 8 million documents. You don't even know what you're signing.
Yep. Exactly. Now you're getting it. Okay. So when you record the property, you are using a government service that is not required, voluntary. The tax is a tax on that activity. The amount of the tax is gauged by the value of the property, but it is not a tax on the property. If you are not recorded, you don't get a tax. And there are ways to unrecord, though it's a little bit complicated. I don't know if you want to go into it now because it is a bit complicated, but I can't explain it to you. There are ways to properly do it. There is some risk, but if you do it properly, okay, the risk is minimal. And like I say, I made myself the guinea pig on everything I teach. So, before I went out to teach it, I tried it out on myself. When I opted out of, when I rescinded my Social Security number, I had a payment plan with the IRS, and they said I owed them more money, and that's what drove me to despair. And a friend of mine said, "You don't have to pay it," and I thought she was crazy. And so she introduced me to somebody who introduced me to my teacher. And once I learned what I learned, I went into the law libraries for 2.5 years and researched the law. And then I made myself the original guinea pig, rescinded my number. And after a few months of correspondence, the IRS left me alone, and they don't bother me. I haven't paid a penny in income tax in 30 years.
So fascinating. There was a real demonization in the past 10 years by the ADL and other groups that would target conversations like these and this whole idea of being a sovereign citizen. Do you remember when that was targeted by the mainstream media? Almost on a weekly basis, I would see them making a big deal about the sovereign citizen movement and targeting essentially conversations like this one, where we're trying to just get down to the bottom of the rabbit hole to understand what kind of system we're even involved in here. But they don't want us to know, and they certainly don't want us waking up others and talking about it.
No, and the ADL says that I'm a hate group, by the way.
Yeah, well, join the club.
Yeah.
Join the club.
You're right, but it's the two-class system again. The nobility makes the laws and owns the property. The commoners have no say in any of that. We are considered the commoners. We're not supposed to know this stuff.
I think that for those listening, just a word of caution. Anything that you've heard in this conversation that you might consider implementing in your own life really needs to be researched further. Okay, this is not an endorsement of doing anything that's been described in this interview, but it is an endorsement of figuring out who the heck you really are, discovering your corporate personhood, your name in all caps, and doing more research. I think there's valuable information in this conversation that we've just had with Brent Johnson.
And by the way, what you said about the name in all caps is true. I have a case out of Washington State in which the judge actually admitted it. Okay, in the case, it was never a published case, but I have the actual case, and the judge actually admitted it. It's called the nom de guerre, which, by the way, means name of war. Okay, wartime is emergency power type stuff. It all interrelates. But the all capital letters, if you properly address that issue in a court venue, they actually will dismiss the case because they are not talking to the natural person. They can only talk to the corporate entity who is identified by the all caps letters. That's absolutely true. Also, I would say to people, I used to say this all the time on my radio show, I would tell you, don't believe a word that I said. Check it all out for yourself. I give people ways to do that, but don't believe. We get in trouble by believing. For example, Sean, when is your birthday?
Well, let's just say it's May 10th. May 10th.
Okay, how do you know?
Probably from my birth certificate.
Okay, so you read it someplace and you believed what you read,
or
or
what
maybe
told.
maybe your mother told you and you believed her. Now, I'm not suggesting it's not your birthday. Your mother was very probably a credible witness to the event, but you cannot know the date of your birth. Now, in the case of your mother, as an example, she's a good, credible witness, so it's reasonable that you believe her. But how many things do you think you know that are actually based on belief? And is the source of the information that you believe as credible as your mother is to the event of your birth?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That relates to everything,
Yes, it
literally
does.
everything. And there's a rabbit hole that I've gone down with a couple of guests that people do not like being talked about. They think it's a psyop. But let me just say that maybe the biblical version of creation is quite a bit more spot on than NASA might lead us to believe. That's just my view. All right,
Oh
let me.
yeah, oh yeah. We can talk about things like that as well. Yeah, I mean, like I told you, like you interview me, it can go on and on and on, and I know you have time constraints and everything, but I'd be more than happy to come back another time if you like.
Yeah, I would like that because I think that whole corporate personhood, name in all caps thing, that's its own subject, and we barely scratched the surface on that. So we definitely should have another conversation. Let me ask you, can people reach out to you, and be careful before you give your email or invite anybody to reach out, because I have an audience that is very engaged and supportive, but I don't want you to be bombarded. But in
No,
my
no.
case, if I was going
So
to do any of this, I'd want to hire an expert like you to help me go right through the process.
and yes, a lot of people feel that way, and yes, I'm equipped for that, and thank you for the admonition, and I appreciate that. But yes, if people want to get in touch, the best way, okay, is to call. It's a toll-free number, 888-385-FREE. That's 888-385-3733. 888-385-3733. You can also go to my website. Okay, tons of information there. Information about my books, information about other things that we do. I do a weekly conference call as well. Information is up there. I have a room in the uh, Telegram community where I'm in pretty much every day. People ask me questions there. Entrance to that community is simple. Go to my website again. It's www.freedomradio.us, freedomradio.us, or call 888-385-3733. And I'll be more than happy to send you information about what we do, answer your questions, or whatever else is on your mind.
Well, thank you so much, Brent. Guys, just to remind you, the talk show is The Voice of Freedom. Brent has authored the books The American Sovereign, How to Live Free from Government Regulation, and The Quiet Voice of God. And the new one, The Pursuit of Happiness, Freedom in the Human Spirit, are those available on Amazon, or where?
They're only available through Freedom Bound International. That's my company,
Good for you.
Freedom Bound International. And like I say, go to the website or call the number.
All right, very good.
There
Brad,
are there are actually some libraries that have the book in them, but I don't know exactly where they are. I
all right.
just know that they are out there.
All right. Well, I know Amazon is a force for evil in my view, and modern day book burners. But a lot of authors have to put their stuff up there because they're the biggest game in town, I guess. But
Well,
I'm glad you've avoided them.
I've never been in this to make as much money as possible. That's not what it's about. So I don't go to places like Amazon or things like that. I just keep everything as closely held as possible. We're small, but we're very effective.
All right. Well, very good. Guys, our guest has been Brent Johnson. Brent, thanks so much for your time today. And yeah, let's do this again.
My pleasure. I would love to.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. It really means a lot to me. A special thank you to our patrons who are keeping us in this fight for truth and real news. This is the stuff the Mockingbird mainstream media doesn't want you to know. They don't want you talking about it. Neither does the ADL. And guys, I'll remind you, for real news 24/7, visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. God bless, guys. Bye-bye.
The government is the beast. The Constitution is the whip and chair. The people are supposed to be the lion tamers. They have been remiss in their duty.